Tonight, Mayor de Blasio and New York's First Lady Shirley McRae, they pay their respects to the two fallen police officers of the NYPD tragically gunned down in the line of duty. Visiting the place where the officers, Rafael Ramos and Officer Lou, losing their lives. This as New York's protesters refused to heed the mayor's request to suspend those protests until after the funerals. And other officials join in the criticism of this mayor's leadership. What could this rift between the mayor and the city leaders mean for his administration and other cases that are in the works? And embattled Congressman Michael Grimm, he's pleading guilty to federal tax evasion. What kind of punishments could he be facing? Our legal panel will weigh in. Plus, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster Steve Adubato, he's joining us for a preview of his one-on-one interview coming up later tonight with Governor Chris Christie. Evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, tonight we'll begin, of course, in New York City. That is where a moment of silence was observed for those New York police officers, Wenji and Lou and Rafael Ramos, who were murdered in the line of duty. In New York City today, a moment of silence for two police officers, Wenji and Lou and Rafael Ramos, murdered in the line of duty.
These families want a city filled with peace and unity. It's our job, all of us, to create that.
Flags flying at half-staff and city officials calling for calm and a temporary pause to the protest movement against the police that had been growing in the wake of the choking death of Eric Garner and the shooting death of Michael Brown. Flowers, candles, and wreaths, they've been placed at the site in Brooklyn where the two officers were ambushed while sitting in their parked patrol car. The authorities, they identified the attacker as Ishmael Brinsley, a troubled 28-year-old with a grudge against police.
You can see how much it's touched people and what it means to them. And, you know, the police, they're our first line of defense and our last line of defense.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio visited the site. After standing in silence, he left a bouquet of flowers. On Monday, Eric Garner's daughter Emerald joined the many hundreds who came to pay respects to the fallen officers.
I just had to come out and let the family know that we stand with them.
Community leaders spoke about unity.
We must come in unity to stop the tragedy that has happened.
I want to take you to a live picture right now. And as we mentioned before, the mayor had asked protesters to observe basically a stand down where there wouldn't be protests until the funerals and the wakes, obviously, for those fallen officers had happened. Protesters, they may have observed that yesterday, but today, as you can see, they are out in force. This in Midtown right now, I believe on Madison Avenue, you have protesters. There's a large police presence and a large media presence. They're covering it. Protesters saying that while they feel for the officers and their families, that the issues that needed to be observed should go on. So that said, this is going on right now. And I want to bring in Dominic Carter to talk about what we're seeing unfold right now. Dominic Carter, of course, has been covering this as a journalist for a long, long time. And not to date you, Dominic, but people are comparing this back to the bad old 70s. Not that we're there in terms of both crime in the city, obviously, and not that we're there in terms of the complete breakdown between the police, and both the safety concerns attached to it and maybe even the mayor's office. But we're seeing signs that at least the fracture between the mayor's office and the police has gotten that bad.
Richard, it's really a difficult situation, one that I haven't seen in my tenure. I am trying to find out, Richard, who is this exact group that's protesting? Because frankly, it almost amounts to taking your thumb and putting it collectively, if you will, in the eye of the city. These two police officers have not been laid to rest yet.
Yep.
How do you resume protesting? It's just unimaginable.
Yeah, and even the mayor, who has been extremely sympathetic to the protesters, in fact, at one point meeting with the protesters, defending the protesters, not just right to march, but also saying that the vast, vast majority had been law-abiding and exercising their First Amendment, and in fact got angry in the press conference yesterday when people questioned him on it, saying that tiny fraction, you, the media, are trying to divide us. But even he pleaded for these folks to stand down till at least the wake is this Friday and the funeral this Saturday for Officer Ramos. Officer Liu, I know a lot of his family is coming from Asia, from China, to be here for it. So we'll get more dates for that. So there's 5 primary protest groups, the Justice League being probably the biggest name of the groups. They've been involved in this, and they made a point that said they're going to protest nonetheless. Now, I want to get your take to the criticisms that have come, and there's a new one today, but to remind everybody in terms of some of the most vocal criticisms, right at the hospital at Woodhull, where the officers were taken to and unfortunately unable to be saved from really what amounted to an assassination on Saturday in Brooklyn. You saw the mayor walking in, and you'll never forget the turnbacks of the officers that were there in presence. Soon thereafter, right outside that same hallway, right in front, Pat Lynch, who's head of the PBA, he had some scathing criticism, not just for obviously the shooter here, but obviously for the mayor and some others that he thought enabled the situation. This is a reminder, and also take a listen to the person who spoke after him, a man who once held Bill de Blasio's job, Rudy Giuliani, and listen to their criticisms.
There's blood on many hands tonight. That blood on the hands starts on the steps of City Hall in the office of the mayor.
4 months of propaganda, starting with the president, that everybody should hate the police. I don't care how you want to describe it. That's what those protests are all about.
I think he should resign.
All right. So those were the 2 criticisms. There were many more. I'm going to get to the new one in 1 second, Dominic. But Mayor Giuliani made a distinction saying that the police weren't right to say the blood was on the hands necessarily of Mayor de Blasio. But he did say, and George Pataki probably went even stronger than Rudy, where he said directly the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, and the mayor here bore some responsibility for creating an atmosphere, Dominic, where this happened. But there was a criticism that was new in the last 24 hours, and that, of course, from Governor Pataki. But let's get to the new criticism, and this coming from Calvin Butts, who is a respected figure, not just in the black community, but in the faith community and an institution in New York City. Listen to what he had to say about Mayor de Blasio.
Giving leadership to the police, encouraging them, was not something that came across strongly for me. These men and women have been demoralized. And what you need to do is begin to assume a position that says, you know, I am your leader. I am telling you, I am with you. We're fighting all kinds of crime in this city, and we will not tolerate not only your blood, but anybody's blood being shed on the streets.
Give the context, Dominic, too, for folks who aren't familiar with Pastor Butts, how significant it was that he said that.
Well, you know, Richard, my take on Pastor Butts here is a bit interesting because I can agree with everything that he said there in terms of most reasonable people will say that this is a mainstream leader. He's not a flamethrower. But I have to tell you, there's an ongoing competition for attention between Reverend Butts and Reverend Sharpton. And so some of the additional comments that Reverend Butts made basically amounts to reading between the lines, and I know both of them very well. Why are you paying attention to Sharpton, Mr. Mayor, instead of coming to me when I'm the mainstream leader? And you know, perhaps there is a point to be made there. He's also, as you know, a university president, reappointed by Governor Cuomo. But so he's not someone, even though he tangled with Rudy Giuliani years ago, he's not someone that runs to the cameras, not to say that Mr. Sharpton is, but he's someone that's more laid back, more reserved.
Okay, but Dominic, the point that he made, and I've heard others say it, but it's surprising hearing it from Reverend Butts. It was not the same as Sharpton, but nonetheless is the mayor hasn't said sorry, in effect. He's made it clear that he grieves for the families. He thought it was an inexplicable and unacceptable tragedy that happened and that everyone loves the police, and he keeps telling everyone how he loves the police. But the fact is that he hasn't said sorry. And I've heard from a lot of voices, some that surprised me, that say, even though Lynch went as far as he did with the PBA, it's in this mayor's best interest to say, if anyone misinterpreted what I had said, that I don't support the police, I'm sorry. People think he's going to need to go that far to do this. And I've heard it from interesting sources, not just the typical mayoral critics.
Richard, excellent point, and I'm thinking as you're talking, and I don't recall, maybe you can help me here, a mayor in recent memory coming out and saying, I'm sorry.
No. And a lot of people think, by the way, that he shouldn't apologize, because who in their right mind thinks that some deranged lunatic in Baltimore who shoots his girlfriend and then travels up here to basically, assassinate two people that he'd never met before. And let's be clear, an Asian and a Latino officer, so this wasn't even a racial component to it necessarily, but he just was going after officers in a premeditated fashion, then kills himself, that somehow the mayor, planted that seed in his mind to do that or whatever else. So I think most people think that, that Pat Lynch, maybe he was speaking through emotion, maybe it was something more, maybe a lot of the rank and file agrees with him. I'm not going to stand here and say one way or the other, but many people thought he crossed that line that day. And I know you've sat down, as we can see, an interview that you did not long ago with Pat Lynch, and this was before even the Gardner verdict came down.
Pat Lynch, as you well know, is a very emotional person, very emotionally charged when it comes to defending his membership, and perhaps rightfully so. If the police union is not going to aggressively defend police officers, then who is? But at this point, Richard, we're dealing with something that's very dangerous that I haven't seen in 30 years in New York City, and something has to give. The mayor has to gain control. I'm not even dealing with an apology. Some say an apology is warranted, some say it isn't. The mayor has to somehow, and I don't know how, gain control of this situation. I mean, he doesn't control what people do, but less than 24 hours after he said don't march, people are out there marching. And it's an insult. It's a downright insult to those police officers that have lost their lives.
Does he condemn the protesters, even if it's a peaceful, quiet march? What does the mayor do? Now, the mayor's going to have a situation where he campaigned Dominic. And if we remind people, if we can show them, guys, and control them, when he walked in, the mayor that is, to that hospital this past Saturday, the reception he got from the officers, if anyone hasn't seen it, I mean, it's jarring, the visuals of officers consciously turning their backs on the mayor. But Dom, he campaigned on that, that he was going to change stop and frisk. He got criticism from the left that he didn't go far enough on broken windows, and this was the scene Saturday as you see officers consciously, intentionally turning their back on him, not even giving him the respect to even look at him, giving them
Richard,
his back.
But let me ask you this question. Looking at that video right now.
Have you seen that before?
If I've never seen that before. But if I'm the head of the mayor's advance team, I need to be fired. Why, given the relationship that this mayor has with police unions, why would you walk him directly past those officers?
You know what, though?
Why would you do that?
There's been many media missteps that he's made here that people have pointed out over the past. Maybe some language in the relationship of police, but I think he's got a more complicated dilemma than his predecessors, because the whole premise of his campaign was that he was going to create a system of both justice and policing that was equal regardless of color of skin. He believes he won with a mandate. People can debate this. Jeannie last night told us he was
right.
wrong.
It was not a mandate.
Fair enough. But he believed when he was elected that he did. He brought back Bill Bratton, who nobody thinks is a soft-on-crime commissioner, and everything else, and even took heat, as I said, from the left. Now he's in the process of retraining. He kept the city from boiling over after Gardner. People can disagree whether it would or wouldn't. I don't think he had as much choice as people like to think he did. I know you happen to agree with me on that. But now he's in a box where he's kind of half pregnant. He's going through these changes. He's got the Akai Gurley case coming down. I'm going to bring the legal team in not long from now to get into that. And that one seems to be, I don't understand the justification for shooting a guy who's just trying to leave his apartment to go out into the night, right? And what happens there with a heightened police? So you're right. He's got to navigate this, and I'll only say after a year, I haven't seen him exhibit the delicate's the wrong word, but the nuanced approach that you seem to have to. I don't want to hear him talking about Dante anymore. I don't think it does him any favors. I don't want to hear him talk about his personal family in these situations. It's not about him and his unique narrative anymore.
But Richard,
and that's the challenge.
Okay, and I agree with that. But let's look at President Obama for a second. As the President of the United States, when the Trayvon Martin case was going on out of Florida, George Zimmerman, the president politically could not say that, you know, that he was on the side of Trayvon Martin and his family. So what does he do instead? If I had a son, my son would look just like Trayvon Martin. That's a wink wink to communities of color and to progressives that I'm on your side. De Blasio tried the same thing with Dante.
But he went a little too far for some, Dominic.
Yes.
And other people said
And
he
the
spoke
unions
truth to
are up-
power.
the unions
to
are up
say,
in arms.
I've had not only the talk with my son, but I've worried at night if he would come home straight. And then 34,000 police officers in New York City said, time out. You're saying you're my boss, and you, my boss, are worried that I can't be trusted with your son. Now, maybe he didn't mean it that way, but that was a little translation that they took, and at least some took.
Richard,
and there we go.
Put it another way, right? The comparison based on what Mr. Lynch, what the PBA feels, what Mr. Mullins and the sergeants feel. Imagine a broad brush. Just imagine this. And we say, for example, all doctors are racist. Or better yet, all journalists are racist. We wouldn't take that too well. That's the scenario that police officers are in, they feel,
and that's one
from the mayor.
interpretation. You can argue certainly that if you're not just the mayor, but his supporters say he didn't say that. He's been supportive of police.
But he
it's
implied
interpretation.
it.
Right.
And
but,
perception
and we
is
know,
reality.
And we know, and I know up on the break, we never live in a vacuum. Certainly in New York City we don't. There will be other incidents that are going to come up. There will be other instances where this gets tested. And I'm sorry, and I know we got a lot of fans out there who are involved in law enforcement, and we speak with, you know, with no daylight with Dominic and I, and we respect it, but there's a chain of command. People can't make up where and how they choose to police. That comes from above. And at the end, you know, if it's a paramilitary organization like people are saying it is, you couldn't do what they did on Saturday in the military because they'd be in the brig right now. Right? So whether you like them or not, you still got to respect the office because there will be times when the dictum is going to be coming down from there. They got to figure out how to work this thing out here, but, you know, this is going to be very difficult. As we said, Friday and Saturday.
Not looking good, Richard. And frankly, I know you got to go, but a lot of Democrats behind the scene, they're talking one-term mayor and gearing up to run for mayor, to actively challenge him. I know we're a long way away from the election, but this is what Democrats are talking about privately. Democrats.
Interesting. Dominic, thank you very much here. When we come back, I'm going to bring in the legal team here. We're going to break down some challenges. We'll talk about this story and also put in context all of my guests here, former assistant district attorneys themselves. So we're going to be talking about this and much more. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.